Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. The average time between being hacked and realizing you've been hacked is 1 year. Can you afford to let an intruder roam your network for that long? Can your company weather the fallout when this comes to light? Black Hills Information Security can find the bad guys in your network and train you to do it yourself. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com to find out how a hunt teaming engagement can help you find a persistent threat in your network. Has your network been breached? Cybereason can help you answer this question. Cybereason products hunt for threats within your network and eliminate them in real time. To Cybereason, real time means within seconds. Founded by former military hackers who don't play by the rules, they've built this experience into their platform. Harness ingenuity and imagination, not just code, to defeat attackers. Cybereason, disrupt the adversary and let the hunt begin. Endgame automates the hunt for both known and never-before-seen adversaries in enterprise networks. Built on unique knowledge on the adversary's tools, techniques, and tactics, Endgame's centrally managed agent prevents, detects, and responds to advanced adversaries in the earliest stages of the kill chain without prior knowledge. Endgame, automate the hunt. Welcome back, everyone, to Ball Security Weekly. Quick announcement, the first B-Sides in Uganda, B-Sides Kampala, will be held October 14th through the 15th. The CFP is open until July 15th. That's soon. So get them in there. They're looking for topics on network security, web application security, innovative attack and defense strategies, malware analysis, biometrics, and evolutionary computing robotics. Bonus points for bringing an actual robot. Visit bsideskampala.com to submit your talk today. Paul Ewing, is that how you say your last name? Is it Ewing?
It's a hard U. You know, if you think of like a Star Wars fighter that never made it, the Ewing. So that's
Ewing.
not it. But Ewing.
Ewing.
See, hey, speaking their language too with Star Wars.
That's right.
Yeah.
What did we say?
I always thought it'd be a cool. It made so much logical sense. You had the other single letter names. Why not have an E that actually functioned? I mean, it'd be awesome, right?
It's like an E that should be a double E. I got it. That's awesome. Ewing. On the Stogie Geeks show, which we did earlier today, someone was talking about a cigar and said you had to search your feelings. The Star Wars references that ensued.
Wow.
And I'm like, so you're saying we can rule the galaxy as father and son? Just do it.
You know it to be true.
He's like, then this is another cigar. I'm like, there's another. It's a sister. It was so nerdy. So, Paul, tell us a little about yourself before we get started here.
Yeah, sure. I mean, tough to follow up Tim. Listen to him for a bit, but it's funny. You're following a classical musician with I think humanities as well. I think I heard him say. I mean, that's a tough combo. You're actually looking at a guy that went to school to be a meteorologist, oddly enough. So this really helped me be a hunter, I guess, because it helped me prepare that. Just assume I'm going to be wrong all the time. So that's really crucial.
See, now instead of getting paid to be 50% right and get paid lots of money, you get to be paid a heck of a lot more opportunity to be right and get paid lots of money.
That's right.
Well, it's funny. I mean, I joke about that. I ended up getting a math degree as well, so the mathematician side maybe made me a little more marketable. But I always joke when I got into the InfoSec community and now working here at Endgame, everybody's like, "Oh, well, what background? Like, what do you use more from your collegiate path? I guess if you want to think of it that way." And I was like, you know what? The meteorology skills, as much as I love the core math skills that I learned, meteorology, making sense of these crazy plots, how air masses moved. I got to stop myself because I will nerd out about that. We can have a polar vortex conversation next week or whatnot. But yeah, it really helped when you're thinking about how to make sense. When you're talking about big data, when you're thinking about chaos theory, that is this community. It really helped a lot. So now with Endgame, not applying the meteorology directly, but with Endgame, I'm focused on our analytics, and that's a very broad term, but with our sensor, we're getting a lot of information back, and how do we you saw the slogan here just before, automate the hunt, but really what does that mean? And it's let's highlight those key characteristics that a user will want to investigate because of malicious tendencies or suspicious behavior. And my job is to develop some of those analytics and focus on some, Endgame does a weird thing where they let researchers actually code. So that's pretty bizarre. So I actually get to write the analytics and get into the product. It's pretty cool.
Nice.
Paul, you and I were speaking last week or so, and I think I mentioned a hot button that you're very passionate about in terms of hunting, and that is looking at this landscape called the hunting. I find people that are like, well, you should do hunting that's focused on logs. And then I find other people that you should do hunting focused on networks. And other people like, well, you should do hunting focused on the endpoint. And I think really the strategy should be all three. But can you describe some of those struggles and how we incorporate all of these into hunting?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think there's almost like a bigger philosophical problem here where I think hunting has turned into this like very mystical thing where, I think a lot of guys think these hunters are sitting in a room spinning in a chair. Then they say, oh, you know what? I felt the presence of something bad happening. But it's a very...
We're hunting rabbits. We're hunting hackers.
It's a very selfless job. I mean, and I agree with you. I think the simple answer is entire security stack will give you the best results for your hunting and whatnot. But obviously, I'm working here at Endgame because I really believe in the endpoint side of that equation. Strictly because, and of course, I'm following domain tools, so I'm not going to. There's nothing wrong with like network hunting, and that's very viable and it can work. I mean, obviously, malware will have configured user agent strings. If you have the header information, there's a lot of games you can play just with network traffic and do hunting within that. But obviously, as the attackers are evolving, and we can do the simple quintessential say, oh, everything's encrypted now and whatnot. But still, there's games you can play. I really like the endpoint side of the equation because it's almost like this this telephone game. When you're looking from the network side in, right? So many environments today, you have that proxy sitting there and you're like, do I have command and control occurring here? Where's the endpoint that's actually causing this? And you just have this huge proxy, NATA devices sitting behind that, and it becomes overwhelming. So, really, I like this side of the endpoint side of it because you can play a lot more games. Not saying it's any easier. We're constantly getting data. Isn't the problem anymore, whether you're sitting in a network, whether you're collecting logs, whether you're doing, strictly kind of endpoint surveying technology. But, when you're sitting there at the endpoint and you can start mirroring together what network traffic is generated from the process or what's my registry look like? We can talk more.
Paul, I just want to play devil's advocate just to make your job harder. But because I spent a lot of time thinking about this problem. And I'll try and summarize it as best I can. When you're looking at logs and doing hunting, I feel like the drawbacks are that you have so much data and that data is in different formats, and you might not be getting all of the data at all the right times because people turn logs off. They tune things to log certain things and not log other things. So I feel like that's not a reliable source. When I go to the endpoint, I feel like there's always some kind of trick that can be some kind of evasion because I'm on the system, I'm in the kernel, and I can trick whatever's on that system, and there's so many different games that I can play. However, when I get to the network side, the network doesn't lie, right? At the end of the day, even if the compromise is successful, I have to send traffic over the network, and I believe that is the most reliable source. But you, having the background that you do in the research you're doing today, what are some of the advantages and how do you overcome some of the shortcomings? I think we're probably pretty much in agreement that logs aren't the best way to do it, but how do you respond to the logs and endpoint having those limitations and network, in my opinion, being the best way?
Sure. Yeah. No. And you'll never find me say that network isn't a great hunting apparatus. I think my liking of the endpoints is really, there's a lot of frameworks out there that kind of break down the entire I'd say attack life cycle or whatnot. I love thinking about even MITRE's attack framework, just as an example. And I think it's something when you start thinking about this, of course, when malware will initially start beaconing out, that you can run network analytics on that for even time-based analytics to look for beaconing from malware. But you look at that core left side of the timeline, and just as one example, you mentioned kind of the evasion tactics, and I'd probably I won't ran into that too much because I actually think you have another one of our researchers here next week to really talk about fileless and in memory, and so save that for him. But one thing that I like is is just persistence alone. I think that's really cool, a cool concept. So when you're thinking about endpoint based hunting, these advanced threats, when they acquire a target, they want to maintain persistence. The biggest irony I think we see in this today is even with fileless attacks, and that's of course that's a buzzword in itself. These in memory, malwareless, living off the land, whatever it may be, but the attacker in a lot of cases will even create some subtle schedule tasks or service to call their PowerShell a PowerShell script to initiate their fileless type behavior. And I think that's where that's where my endpoint kind of love comes in from the hunting side is, here you have the actual workstation, the actual endpoint that the attacker has compromised or potentially compromised. And so let's hunt within this apparatus of where they may have suspicious artifacts within running processes or via just registry inspections and looking for their persistent behaviors. I don't know if that kind of
I like that. I haven't thought about it in that light. In that the attacker is living on the endpoint, so let's go look where they're living and trying to be persistent. And that logs in network is going to catch some of that behavior of their living. But it's fleeting, right? They're going to leave a log trace, and then there's going to be gigabytes and gigabytes of logs that come after that. Same thing on the network. They're going to leave a network trace, but it's going to be lots of packets and things that happen after that. Whereas if you're looking where they're living, which is a dangerous place to be, I agree, but it is looking for that persistence, I think, does have its merits there. So, no, thank you for. I was hoping for that kind of perspective on the problem, and you nailed it.
Sure, yeah. I think the hardest part with hunting in general is how do we quantify our efforts? I mean, this is a really hard part just within the InfoSec community in general, right? So as we start applying, there's no wrong way to hunt. I think if you're an organization and you're not hunting, and we can talk more about what that means, but if you're not trying to partake in this almost behavioral based discovery within your environment, then network. I mean, even though we're kind of saying, logs can be overwhelming, logs, endpoint, whatever you can do to start inspecting your environment is a good thing. And then try to quantify your work by using these frameworks and almost timeline of events to help you kind of discover what phase the attacker may be in.
Yeah. So do you think that's where sort of the meteorology thing starts to fall into place, because that's where you start to talk about big data algorithms looking at, massive numbers of endpoints, massive numbers of entries, massive numbers of actions, and then trying to sort of derive some sort of trend, some sort of pattern out of that almost chaos, and pull that together to create, a forecast that you want to use for what that hunting is going to do.
No, I think that's spot on. I mean, I love the weather puns in there. That was awesome. But I think you're.
Doug's very punny.
Yeah. But I completely agree with you. It can be a big data problem, but really what it comes down to, especially in meteorology, not to nerd out on that anymore, but like you're trying to make determinations of these air masses and how they move. So it is kind of making sense of, data that may not make the most sense. So one strategy I always tell individuals is, rather than worrying about, let's focus on detecting this specific behavior. And that's very important. You learn something new about a new tool out there, it does X, Y, Z. Let's make sure we have a prevention of protection in place. But really the core with hunting a lot of times comes down to comparative analytics, if you want to think of it that way. So really like trying to think about how you can use baseline information, gold image information, do deltas, because some of it comes from from almost the meteorology and looking at like historical events to help you do your forecast. And then you can apply this to behaviors.
So hold on, I want to stop you there, Paul, because I think people who are evaluating endpoint protection technologies are lost in kind of this sea of what I think is like four different things, right? Because I think you have signature-based detection, you have behavior-based detection, which can often mimic signature-based detection. Then you have whitelisting, but then you have more of what you're describing. And how do people differentiate between those four things as it's specific to endpoint and hunting?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I think, signatures are these, indicators of compromise, these IOCs, they're still very important. I mean, what's the old kind of joke? If you and your friend are being chased in the wood by a bear, you just need to be faster than your friend, right? So I think like the indicators are still very important because no one wants to be compromised by the same thing that had, compromised another business in their same sector. And that's still very important. But I agree with you. I think signatures have their value, but you're exactly right. These behaviors or heuristics, that's really where you need to start looking for these threats. How can you run analytics across all of this information that's available to you and make a strong determination that something is anomalous? Maybe you start with that, and then how do you determine something is suspicious from that? So I think.
Well, I think a lot of vendors, obviously not Endgame, right? But a lot of vendors. And I think this largely is hopefully starting to go away, but they'll say, well, we don't have signature-based detection, we have behavior-based detection. And all the behavior-based detection is, well, we saw this registry key, and they wrote this file, and that's a behavior. And I'm like, no, that's just multiple signatures put together. And I think it's really important for our listeners to understand that there's some really significant differences in what's happening based on endpoint detection today.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that's the almost back to this philosophical problem of hunting, where we focus a lot on the practitioners out there. I'm sure, like, well, if a signature is looking for a run key, then I've been doing that forever. I've been hunting since the dawn of run keys. But no, I think especially where we're going with at Endgame is now let's start thinking about what is the core, and I hate to use the word behavior again here, but what is the attacker going to do when he acquires the target? So as a good example of like what a behavior could be or what a heuristic could be is, the classic, you'll hear different frameworks talk about discovery or host enumeration. So what's one of the first things an attacker may do? They land on a box. They're going to do ipconfig or ifconfig, dump domain admins, dump local admins. We even saw this in the Mandiant classic APT1 report, where all of these commands were run as part of this discovery and reconnaissance, and then you can now start looking for this behavior of what, it's almost like asking, where are my admins, but who's operating not like an admin? And I think that's the core of making a determination of
Yeah, it's interesting. So how is the newer solution, such as Endgame, differentiating between whitelisting as well?
Yes, so I think, it's application, just application whitelisting in general is it's still a viable solution, of course, but I think the issue is that back to your initial question about the defense evasion or how attackers are evading things, is that the attacker, they're becoming very good, and they've been doing this forever, about injecting into legitimate processes and things like that. So even if you're relying solely on a whitelisting approach, you can be tricked. One of my favorite, I'm not saying it's directly a whitelist, but one recent-ish example, I think back in March of just this past year, was the whole DriedX version 4 and that came out with atom bombing and new code injection. But you strip all that away. One thing that was really cool about that was they did a DLL hijack in a very primitive sense, where they kind of brought in a native Windows file, stored it still in System 32, but added another subdirectory, and now here's the very legitimate, signed by Microsoft, everything, everything would pass your checks, but they had a a malicious DLL that would hijack in that thread just by almost like a search order. And I think that's where I'd say that's in the paradigm of maybe how whitelisting can trick you. But I think it just goes to show that at the end of the day, the attackers, they're going to evolve. They want to hide within the noise. Some may live off the land, and PowerShell's pretty powerful. Mm-hmm. We've seen examples of that using the tools that are available to you is highly successful, and it can really trick your hunters out there.
So in your research, Paul, what do you recommend that people do in terms of hunting with respects to the endpoint? What are some strategies that you recommend?
Yeah, I alluded at this a little earlier when we talked about persistence, but I always think having a strategy is the most important. I love you talked about network activity is still highly advantageous. So it's important. How can you mirror run some primitive net stats, store that locally? I mean, at scale this could be an issue, but how do you get at the network activity that's being generated by the processes and sync that up to make I'd say a more logical decision about something nefarious may be going on. But it's got a little distracted there. But I think really I love persistence. I love running processes. I love comparative analytics. Just these root kind of every hunter has their certain flavor to it. You may have guys that are quote unquote hunters that did reverse engineering or forensics in a previous life, and they want to go and start pulling memory and dumping memory and doing analysis on that. But I think never lose sight of the fact that you can learn a lot from your environment, right? Let's go on the assumption, knock on wood, that if you do have a compromise, not every workstation is compromised, not every endpoint is compromised. So, looking for the known bad behaviors is always good, but then looking towards the comparative, how can you learn from different legitimate endpoints or gold images and build off that. I really love doing anything I can do off a command line. Highly recommend just doing a diff between different registry dumps and then seeing where that takes you. I think it's more than just anomalies, but doing broad comparisons I would always suggest.
Yeah, one thing, Paul, I think a lot of people struggle with is understanding what's normal in their network and then discovering what's anomalous, right? So what specific things do you have? Because it's so hard in today's day and age, and maybe the endpoint is the right place to do this, to understand what is actually normal. Like you mentioned the gold image, what is normal. And then once it contracts malware, I do believe that you're definitely onto something in saying there's a way to detect that, because they're going to do something that's just outside of the norm, and you can detect that on the endpoint. What are some of those things?
Yeah, we could talk about even just based analytics in general, right? So you could look for different of an order of operations that may be deemed something malicious occurred. As one kind of example, how many times do you see a series of events where I guess what I'm getting to, a process appears in downloads files or within temp, it's executed, another file gets created, and now the previous is deleted from the disk or terminated. A very classic malware thing.
I love the order of operations. I think that's fantastic. We had Javelin Networks on here talking about detecting attacks in Active Directory. And any one given behavior isn't necessarily even if it's I want to query who's in the domain admins group, right? But that in and of itself. However, if you put that together in order of operations, and on the endpoint you're able to identify, you said, hey, they downloaded something, they triggered PowerShell, and then they queried the domain admins. If you can do analytics on that, I think that has a very, very low rate of false positives.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's great, and also one thing that's kind of funny, we can't even lose sight of very primitive, easy things. I think coming in and looking for things that are running out of temp folders and download folders and your run keys. We should also, at least for the listeners out there, I don't want to make it seem like, hey, worry about these very specific edge cases, and let's worry about component object model hijacking. Start comparing the local machine hive to the current user hive. These are very kind of boutique styles, and there's plenty of things we could talk about with that. But also for the hunters, never take for granted very primitive and basic things that malware does, right? It's, if you're talking about a web-based attack, something will show up in downloads or tamper. And also don't forget about prefetch and shim cache. Of course, attackers are evolving and they will get around these primitive natures, but it's always good to kind of knock these basic approaches out before you start worrying about these very boutique order of operations, event sequencing, comparative analytics, as I talked about many times. It's never lose sight of the primitive things.
Right, because there are so many attackers still using the primitive-based attacks.
Yeah,
to
no,
make
it's
some of this
definitely
type
true.
of stuff.
So, Paul, one of the questions that I get a lot, and I'm curious your experiences, is that people say, well, I want to look at my logs, I want to look at what's happening on the endpoint, and I want to look at the network, but I really want a way to take in all three of those data sources and have a console that I can start prioritizing where I need to focus my efforts. What advice do you have for people with that question?
Oh, man. It's tough. You're really getting to the roots of, I'd say, the difficulty with hunting in general. So
yeah, I'm sorry, I don't have any easy questions for you tonight, Paul. I really asked you some very hard questions. It was really unfair of me. Sorry.
Well, no, it's just it's not the first time. Right? So it's funny, like not to sit here and boast about Endgame and whatnot. Of course, I'm very biased because I work here, but the problems we observed were exactly that. Getting data is not the problem anymore, right? If you need more hardware, go buy more hardware. We'll store more data. Or also let's put it into if you have network logs, you have endpoint logs, you have event data. Okay, let's throw that all into our Splunk. Let's throw that all into our Elasticsearch, or you pick it. But these are the problems. How do you query? How does a tier 1 analyst interact with the data? How do you use analytics to your advantage? Of course, I'm biased to that, as I've already talked about. But these were all the problems within the difficulty within the hunting sphere. So I think for anybody that's out there, like, how do I even begin hunting with all these data sources? Of course, use tools, open source when they're available, to you. Of course, purchasing different software will help. But at the end of the day, I think the simplistic answer is just have a strategy for when you're going to start hunting. Don't overwhelm yourself if this is the first time you started thinking about not tasking a signature, not putting that snort rule, that bro rule, whatever it may be, or that yar rule at the endpoint. Start thinking about what is your end state. Where do you want to get to? Do you want to live in the network, much like you've talked about, Paul? Were you like that, or like me? I want to be at that endpoint and get the validity. So I think that, unfortunately, I don't mean to not have the direct answer, because it's a hard problem. But I think it's important not to overwhelm yourself and just start throwing things into a database, and because what's going to end up happening is your poor analysts, they're just going to have no understanding of how they can interact with that data. So it is important to pick the right tools to help your team.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, prioritization of your response it's not a technology problem, right? It's what you're alluding to. It's a people and a process problem, and it's actually one of the things that I advise clients on is, when Larry comes in there as a penetration tester, can really wreak some havoc in your network, but you can't respond to every event, and you can't look at every log source, and you have to prioritize. And what that means is not just not logging things or not collecting the data, but understanding where your sensitive data lives, who should be doing the response, what systems are connected to which other systems, looking at who has access to those various systems, and making your prioritization based on what's happening in your environment. Like, I know my sensitive data really lives here, or this application is really important. Using that as some of the priorities is important.
Yep.
However, on the flip side, someone like Larry is going to find the most seemingly unimportant system in your entire network, and use that to get domain admin, and then you're really in trouble. And I think that's really a really good example of why security is so hard today.
And then if you really want to make that worse, we're going to find that completely useless system to use that to get to domain admin, and then we'll find the actual machines that the domain admins are on and launch all of our stuff from there to make it even more difficult.
Yeah.
I mean, because we're assholes.
Use PowerShell and WMI everywhere, right? Too, to just make it that much easier to find.
Oh no, I mean,
PowerShell definitely helps for sure. And that's a difficult thing too. But I think attack vectors like PowerShell that it's hard to glean some stuff from logs. Although Justin Henderson came on and showed us some good logging techniques. At offensive countermeasures, we show you how to look at things, and the networking can detect things like PowerShell Empire. But PowerShell, like Paul is saying, is executing on that local system, and that in and of itself could be anomalous. So, I think it's all
or
good
not,
stuff.
or not.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. I just have 5 questions for you.
All right, let's do it.
I know
these are the easy ones.
And I likely know that all of your coworkers at Endgame are watching right now and probably waiting for this moment when I ask you the ridiculous Security Weekly 5 questions. So, ready or not, 3 words to describe yourself.
Oh, man. Let's see. I guess I'd have to do weather, hockey, big hockey fan here, and relaxed.
If you were a serial killer, what would be your weapon of choice?
Oh, man, I guess I'd have to use that hockey stick back to my earlier. I mean, that's or maybe the blade, actually. I mean, really, that is perfect.
If you wrote a book about yourself, what would the title be?
Weathermen Can Be Right.
In the popular game of Ask Grabby Grabby, do you prefer to go first or second?
I mean, I guess you have to wait to see what threshold has been set.
Spoken like a true weatherman. Choose 2 celebrities to be your parents.
Alive, dead, fictional, or otherwise.
Oh, geez. Let's see. I guess Richard Dean Anderson. That'd probably be a good start. MacGyver. If I could have true MacGyver behavior.
I mean, you could pick MacGyver. He's fictional. He's a person. So
that's perfect. Yeah. So let's go for Angus MacGyver then. And then. How about Kelly Kapowski? Let's not forget about Saved by the Bell. That's very important.
Oh, my God.
Oh, wow.
Damn.
That's a 90s reference.
Wow. Talk about an awkward boner now. Wow.
That's awesome. Paul, thank you so much for appearing on Paul Security Weekly. It was wonderful having you. Happy hunting.
Hey, thank you, guys. Great meeting you all.
Thanks, Paul.
Great meeting you. With that, we're going to take a short break, come back, talk about security news. So stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.